Hey Larry, how's everything out in Missoula, Montana?
Missoula, Montana. It has been rainy, which apparently is unusual for this realm, but I will take that rain. A little windy today, too. So you wouldn't necessarily know it's summer, perhaps still spring.
So when it rains, what do you do to occupy the time?
Uh, Read, work on my wife's business. I'm the chief support officer for her, play with my dogs inside. We go outside too, though, and, get wet. We dry off pretty easy.
I thought you said dry hop pretty easily for a second there too,
Oh,
and I
well,
imagine you've
that
done quite a
too.
bit of that as well.
Certainly have in the past, yes.
Well, I'm extremely excited for our conversation today because I believe you and I have emailed back and forth randomly over the past 5 years. And at one point, I even took a trip out to Ashland, Oregon, where my sister was living nearby, but you weren't there at that time. I think you had maybe left the brewing industry at some point, but we didn't actually get to have a beer or meet up in person. But
That's
I'll have to
true.
take today.
That's true. Yeah, we've had lots of email conversations for sure. So I think it was only in the last month that we finally saw each other face to face for the first time.
No, it's a beautiful thing when you connect to someone halfway across the country and find a lot you have in common.
That's true. Yes, yes.
So before we dive into anything beer related, off air just now, you had mentioned that we both have a love of asking questions. So the complete different tangent that I wanted to start today, but it's something I'm fascinated in. I 100% love asking questions because I love learning. I'm naturally curious. I always hope when I talk to someone, I'll have that one little takeaway that I can bring into my life to be better or pass it along to someone else to share with them so they can grow. Why do you love questions? That's my first question, at least.
Yeah. Why do I love questions? One, it has to do with the curiosity, but number two is that I'm often very challenged. I walk into a room of people and you walk in and you don't know very many people and it seems like everybody there knows each other. And what I've found is that the way that I can be comfortable is if I simply start asking somebody else questions, right? It takes the pressure off of me to be the one who is supposedly talking all the time. And I think, I was telling you earlier, I learned it when I first read the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Also learned it from my mom because she has a lot of the same personality I have, or I have her personality, I suppose, in this realm. In that when you ask people questions and they get to talk a lot, right? We all love to talk about ourselves or whatever it is that we value or our opinions. So when somebody asks you a question and you start talking, then I don't have to do all the talking and I walk away looking like a great conversationalist, even though I didn't really say anything. I just asked a few questions. And it's so fascinating how far you can dig when you start asking questions. It only takes one question because then somebody talks for a couple minutes and all of a sudden you've got another curiosity. Like you said, you're really curious, Andrew. And oh, I want to know about that. So you ask and on you go. So it's a way to create connection that doesn't, for me, doesn't feel like I have to be the one, quote, carrying the conversation.
When you start these questions, let's say you meet a stranger at let's say a tap room. Do you have that first go-to question you normally lead with?
I don't have a first go-to question. One that I have learned recently is, and we were talking about him earlier, somebody that I follow. He works in the same space as my wife. He deals with human connection, Chad Littlefield. And one of the things that he and his partner in business, who actually died last November, one of the things that they talk about is instead of asking the what do you do or where are you from questions, which is those are very standard questions, is take it a little more personal and do a scan of what the person is wearing. Do they have some really funky earrings on? What's on the baseball cap? Do they have a shirt that's got a logo of some sort on it? And if you start asking questions about those things, it's more personal and interesting, yet it's not so personal, right? That it's a turn off to talk about, right? Because somebody's proudly wearing whatever it is they're wearing. And so that's a really good go-to question. In fact, we had a garage sale here at our house last Saturday as a part of a whole neighborhood-wide garage sale, and I made use of that with all the people that were coming in the garage, and I learned some fascinating things just by asking people questions surrounding what it was they were wearing.
No, that's fascinating. In the world we live in right now, this Zoom-based world, we're interacting with so many people on the internet. It's often hard to fully see what someone's wearing when you only see the upper half of their body. But one thing I've really enjoyed is getting that little glimpse into someone's room, into someone's brew house, into someone's office, and to see what they have on their shelves. And I know I looked at one of the paintings you had on your walls last time, but today
Sure.
I think I'm looking at a photograph over your left shoulder. Now, what is
Yes.
that? What am I
That,
looking? There's lots of blue in the background right now.
yeah,
What do
yeah,
I see?
that is me and my oldest dog, Zook. We were at Crater Lake in the winter around Christmas time. So
So
hence lots of blue and water there.
So the first time I ever went to visit my sister in Oregon, Crater Lake was the number one thing I had to see. So my
Okay.
wife and I, we did like a really big trip. I think we flew into Utah and then ended up in Southern Oregon. And we're driving through. We only had about 24 hours to enjoy Crater Lake. We didn't have time to do like the full, at least 3 day stop that I really wanted to do. So we've been tracking the weather, and the weather was calling for the cloudiest of skies that day. And if you're at Crater Lake, you want to see the beautiful blue water. You want to see the view across. You want to be able to hike it and have a great time. So I was so frustrated when we arrived and they had a sign up that said the visibility is simply terrible. We get there, but of course you're still going to do the trip around Crater Lake because it is a beautiful drive.
Yep.
And after we had done the drive around, which was really enjoyable, I just love scenic drives like that. Even if it's hazy, you don't see the things you want. This cloud started to clear, and you could start to see a glimpse across the lake. So I turned to my wife just like a little kid, and I was like, can we do it again? And we ended up going around Crater Lake, and it was a phenomenal time.
Excellent. Yeah. It's a fabulous, beautiful place for sure.
How many times did you get to visit while you were in Oregon?
We lived there for 11 years. I'm going to say we probably got up there at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, to visit and hang out. And we'd like to go in the wintertime because there's less traffic. The rim, or the road around the rim, is closed in the winter, but you can still get up to Rim Village. And as you can see where that photo is, you can still see the lake on a great day. And there's lots of snowshoeing and cross-country skiing available up there. In fact, one of the first winters we were there, the Park Service on Sundays in the winter, they offer and host a free snowshoe hike Sunday afternoon. So we did that one year. So
Sounds like an awesome experience.
it was.
So we've gone about 10 minutes so far without talking about beer, and it's obvious some people do know you, but you were a brewmaster at Standing Stone for quite some time.
Yeah, I worked at Standing Stone for almost 9 years, I think. Yeah, 2010 to mid 2018.
But by the time I had ended up in Oregon, you were no longer there. So I guess the question is, and we're going to kind of work backwards today.
Okay.
What made you want to stop brewing?
What made me want to stop brewing? I think it's so there's a few things. One is I had been brewing for 20 plus years, and my brewing career was brew pubs, and worked both at individual, privately held, family-owned brew pubs, as well as I worked at a brew pub chain, Granite City Food and Brewery, out in the Midwest. So a little bit larger corporate, publicly held company structure. But for the most part, as a brew pub brewer, you are a department of one. And as all brew pub brewers will tell you, when you're a department of one, you get to do everything, which is great. And after 20 years, it got to be a drag. There were a lot of things I was just done with that I really had zero interest in doing anymore. The aura and the fun had lost its pizzazz. So I was ready to be done with that part of brewing. Was still definitely keen on the science of brewing and tasting beer, because that's what got me into brewing in the first place, was flavor. So that's one component of it. I think another component, which is probably something that most all of us can have had a time in our lives that we've experienced it, is that you're working at a company, and the culture of the company, or the direction of the leadership is taking the company, you just feel out of whack with, that you're not in step, and you don't enjoy going to work. You'd rather not be there because it's not fun to be there. In essence, the culture is crappy. And when I first landed at Standing Stone, they had a pretty good culture. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but over time, there were changes that took place, and it really took a downturn. And so, combined with the fact that I was doing things in the brewery I just had zero interest in anymore, and because of the culture of the company, I really didn't want to be there. It was time to leave. So that's, but you'd say, well, why didn't you go to another brewery? And well, I think that still comes back to, yeah, I was ready to do something different. There were other things that were more interesting to me, in terms of items I hadn't explored yet.
No, all of that makes sense. In my early 20s, I thought I wanted to be a concert promoter. And as much as I loved booking the concerts, there are certain things about the culture of where I was at that took the fun out of it. So no matter how much you're passionate about something and think that's what you want to do, it's not always where you end up.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Now, let's go back a lot farther than, a couple of years ago when you were working in the brewery. When you were just a kid, and Larry, this is one of my favorite questions to ask someone, because I really enjoy going back to when they were a kid and just learning about what did you want to be when you grew up. If we had met on a playground, at school, and your classmate had asked you, Larry, what are you going to be? What was your answer?
Oh, depends on what stage of my childhood, right? I can remember a best friend in late elementary school. He wanted to be a veterinarian. So I said I wanted to be a veterinarian, but it was just because I wanted to do what my best friend was doing, right? I don't think I ever had designs on wanting to be a veterinarian. I know that in high school, I would tell people that I was going to be a United States Senator from Wyoming.
And you grew up in Wyoming?
I did, yes. Yeah, yeah. Wyoming is where I grew up, Casper, Wyoming. And so I think part of that came because I remember it might have been my sophomore or junior year. I did a trip with a bunch of other high school people from around the country out to Washington, D.C., where we got to explore the Capitol and the Supreme Court. And we met with senators and representatives from our home states. And so that was all pretty cool and very impressionable as a sophomore, freshman in high school. And so I remember thinking, yeah, that's definitely, I want to be a senator from Wyoming.
Now, were you already looking up to politicians at that time, or who were your role models, at that point in your life?
That's an interesting question, because as I think back, I don't really know who my role models were. I can think of one, and that was my cross country ski coach in high school. And I think the reason he was a role model for me was because of the way that he approached ensuring that everybody had a voice on the team, and that he was very cognizant of, it was very merit based. It wasn't like I'd experienced in other sports that I played in high school, where it tended to sometimes be more of a popularity contest as to whether you got to play. But with Coach Matson, he was always on the up and up about it, and he was very kind and gentle, while at the same time holding high expectations of us.
So everything you're talking about right now is almost teasing on what I want to get to later about how you're passionate about open book management and coaching and things like that. Did you realize the lessons you were learning from your coaches back then would influence you today? I mean, were you thinking when you were on the team, the lessons he were giving you were going to impact you in the future, or you were just kind of taking it as, oh, I like cross country skiing. This is fun.
You put it that way, Andrew, you might just now be drawing out a connection that I'd never made before. Who knows? Yeah. I think whenever you do learn those lessons in life, I don't think they always sink in right away. It takes time to think back on them and what was happening there and what did I take away from that, and how did that make me the person I am today because of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of these philosophies you learn early in your life, they come to get you, 20, 25 years later when you realize the value that they had that you just kind of overlooked but still experienced.
Sure.
But looking at back then, obviously you didn't become a veterinarian. What did you decide to do when you graduated from high school? Did you go to college?
Yeah, I went to, college was always not a foregone conclusion, but it was, I think, always what I was going to do. My parents were both college graduates, and it just kind of felt that's the next step. And I went to Augustana College, now Augustana University, out in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Didn't know what I was going to do. After my first semester of taking a basic science course, biology, fell in love with it. And little did I know that when I declared a biology major, I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I just love biology. Little did I know that when I became a brewer, so much of what I learned as an undergrad would play a role in helping me better understand and Frank could get a kick out of all the science that goes into brewing.
And so at what point did you decide you wanted to, become a brewer?
After I went to seminary.
I was hoping you'd mention that. So let's dive in. You're going to school biology. Somehow you end up a brewer. Seminary somewhere right in the middle.
Right. Yeah. I explored all kinds of options as a biology major, from, becoming a doctor, a physical therapist, doing research as a research scientist. None of that ever really panned out of high interest. And so I ended up going to seminary, a Lutheran seminary up in St. Paul. I was going to become a Lutheran minister. And there's a longer story to that. As to how I got there. The after effect is that I went by default, and that I was doing it to please other people. And after my year at seminary, which is where I learned to drink flavorful, tasty beer, I think we partied more as seminarians than I ever did in college.
Love it.
This is part of that story of people asking, how'd you get into brewing? And I didn't drink beer in college. I didn't care for the flavor of what most college students drank. And of course, I was going to school in the early 90s, and there wasn't a lot of craft beer out there. But it was at seminary up in St. Paul that I found a couple of beers. I can still remember the first one I pulled out of a fridge at a house party. It was Pete's Wicked Ale. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so different than everything else I've ever tried. This is fabulous. And Sierra Nevada Pale Ale was another one that I had drank. I can still remember the bar that I was sitting in and the friend sitting across from me and experiencing that for the first time. So I really developed that interest in beer at seminary, decided I did not want to continue with seminary. Still didn't know I wanted to be a brewer, but what I did know is I wanted to travel Europe. So I ended up working for 2 years, different jobs. And one of those years, I worked 4 different jobs, probably working 70, 80 hours a week to save money, which you can. When you work 80 hours a week, you don't have time to spend it. But during that whole time, one of the books I picked up was Charlie Papazian's The Complete Joy of Homebrewing. And I never homebrewed because I was too busy working. I ended up getting a subscription to All About Beer magazine back when Ray Daniels was editing that. And so I would read voraciously to learn about it and continue tasting and trying beer. So I went to Europe, traveled, and ended up at Oktoberfest in Munich. Didn't realize I was going to be there at the same time as Oktoberfest. So, that was kind of an after the fact, oh, surprise. Yeah, wow, I went to Oktoberfest. And people would ask me, what are you most looking forward to when you go to Europe? And I know it would surprise, my answer surprised a lot of people. It was always, I am really looking forward to drinking beer in the English pubs. And it was magnificent. The atmosphere, the hand pull, the flavor of the beer, it was great. So I get back to the States. I travel the States for about 4 months. I keep popping into all these little breweries around the States.
And Larry, were you traveling alone for this adventure?
Most of it, yes. Yeah. I was on a group tour in Europe for about 3 weeks, but then traveled on my own for quite a while. In the US, I traveled on my own, but I was staying with friends and family around the country. And when I got home flat broke living with my parents, because I now just spent all my money, by this point, I'd realized, in fact, I think I remember being in a brew pub in Omaha, Nebraska. It was not Upstream. Started with a J. Anyway, they had a beer newspaper, and I remember thumbing through that, and there was an ad in there for the American Brewers Guild. It said, become a brewmaster. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these breweries I've been visiting, the beer I could make that beer. And I think that was my first realization. And so by the time I'm done traveling, I remember going to lunch with my dad. My dad took me out to lunch one day. I can still see him looking across the table at me and saying, so Larry, what are you going to do? And I looked right back at him. I said, Dad, I want to brew beer. No idea how I'm going to make this happen, but I did. And 20 plus years later, I spent a career brewing beer.
So after you saw the classifieds ad, had the conversation with your dad, did you pick up the paper again and just call that number on the ad to say, hey, what do I have to do? Or how did you take the steps to actually get in the industry?
Yeah, I think at that time, I certainly knew about informational interviewing in terms of job seeking. And really the internet in 1997 was America Online. And so you didn't have a lot of opportunity to really go searching online to find places. So it was a matter of knocking on doors of places that I knew. Casper, which is where I grew up, they had a brewery there. I knocked on their door. I ended up following that brewer for a day in the brew house. Firehouse Brewing up in Rapid City, I popped in there. I know that I popped in the door at Snake River Brewing up in Jackson. But Sioux Falls Brewing Company, which is where Sioux Falls is where I went to college, I had gotten a call from a former roommate who'd said, Larry, we're moving out of the house. Come get your stuff. All right. So I headed back to Sioux Falls, and it was on that trip. I knocked on the door, talked with the brewer, Dan Zayer at the time, and we had a conversation. I asked all my informational interview questions, and by the time I left, he had said to me, would you be interested in a job? And well, heck yeah. So that ended up being my first paid brewing gig, assistant brewer part-time. I bartended part-time as well.
So if we could pause for a second, I would love to learn more about the informative interview questions that you posed. To these brewery managers, owners, brewmasters, what were you asking them?
Yeah, what did I ask? I likely asked questions like, well, what's it like to be a brewer? What is your day like? What do you need to know? Or how did you get into it? Where did you learn? I'm probably asked other questions. Not sure what they all were, but yeah, it was probably along those lines.
And looking at, let's say, 1997 to 2017, what do you believe changed most when you kind of think of the question, what it means to be a brewer?
Wow, that's a fabulous question.
I should have sent you an outline before we got to these. You give me all these great ideas I'm so curious about right now, Larry.
Well, one thing that really changed for me was, and I'm sure this was partly me too, but I can remember that the brewery where I first learned, Dan really liked to sit at the bar, and at the time you could still smoke inside in South Dakota. So he liked to sit at the bar and smoke. And So every opportunity there was for a break, he was at the bar smoking. And so I realized much later that there was a lot more work that really could be going on. And that was probably one thing that changed. It didn't take long to change because I was only in that assistant job for probably 8 months before I landed my first head brewing job. And then when I was on my own, that's probably when I started to realize, oh yeah, you got to be moving all day long. This isn't just a sit around. There's always things that are important to be doing. Probably another thing that certainly changed, and comes from me having worked in brew pubs my entire career, is that as a brew pub brewer, it's really important that you essentially be the rock star of that business. And that means not hiding behind the glass or staying in the back of the brewery and the manufacturing facility. It's meaning that you've got to be out in front. You've got to be talking to customers. You got to be willing to give tours. It's important that you are talking with servers. You're doing training for them. You're talking to them at pre-shifts. You're talking to customers at the bar. And that's a huge part. So I learned a lot of marketing of just conversations and talking with people as a part of being the persona of the brewery, the brew pub. As a brew pub brewer, yeah, you got to do all the technical side and brew the beer. And it's important that you are taking care of that conversation marketing side of it as well.
Now, over the past, let's say, 25 years of the brewing industry, there's been a lot of rock star brewers who have become recognized, nationwide, the names that we all know. Do you think rock star brewers are a thing of the past, or are we going to still have those names that appear in our industry that people learn to recognize? And it's an aspiration that, brewers in small town pubs, can they be rock star brewers now? Is that still important?
So I'm going to define the term rock star as I'm using it, right? The way you're using it, Andrew, is rock star as in the well-known name that everybody in the brewing industry knows. And there's probably a large percentage of the beer savvy public who knows. The way I use it is not so much as, well, you're famous simply because you're famous type of thing. It's more a case of, what value are you providing to the organization where you work? And are you providing rock star value to that organization through the work that you do? And so part of that rock star status at your own individual place is really being out in front, being in the public eye. It's being in the back as well, adhering to high quality standards, however you've set them, and producing good beer. So to me, it's rock star as in, what's the value that you're providing to your organization, and are you a rock star in doing that?
No, I absolutely love that, because everybody can't be the next big name, but you can be a rock star in your community, and I think that's really important.
Sure. Yeah.
No, I like that. So, you are super passionate about all things experienced in the beer world, not just back of house. When did you start thinking about more than just brewing? I know you're passionate about, education, you're passionate about teaching, you're passionate about, these interactions. When did you start to feel the importance of those, aspects of beer versus just getting the beer made?
I think the education side I learned pretty early on. I found that I really got a kick out of teaching other people about beer. Had no idea that was something I was interested in, but I learned that very early on, and would certainly get really involved in server education. And one of the things that helped me understand, certainly later on, especially my time at Standing Stone, is that I really liked it, was that I would be to the end of a brewing day and I'd just spent 8.5 hours. I'd been there since 6 in the morning and I'm ready to go home. I'm tired. And I still have an hour and a half, 90-minute new server training class to do. And I'd be thinking, oh, I don't want to do this. I just want to go home. Yet I would get done with that 90-minute class and I would have more energy than I probably walked into the brewery with that morning. And it was that energy of teaching and sharing knowledge with people that just invigorated me. And so that was certainly a sign that, you know, there's more to the beer thing and being a brewer than, you know, making beer.
Awesome. No, looking at, the brewing industry today, I hear so many people talk about the disconnect between front of house and back of house. I mean, you got the hospitality side, you got the production side. What tips do you have for bridging that gap?
And when you say hospitality side, as in you're talking about front of the house, and
Yeah, front of house, tap room.
Production, meaning the brewers, right? And then back of a house, if you have a kitchen.
Sure.
Right. So what was the question again?
How do we bridge that disconnect sometimes? I feel oftentimes you don't have brewers, doing the, educational sessions like you're doing, and you don't have front of house often taking a vested interest in knowing how, the process works. How can we, fix that? And obviously there's not a quick solution to this.
Yeah, it's not. One of the things that, and I've never been an owner, so, but one of the things that perhaps is important is that when owners go to hire brewers, that they focus beyond only technical skills and ability to brew, and focus on what characteristics would make somebody willing to get out and have these conversations. Another way that I thought about it, and I picked this up from a book that I read now probably back, 7 or 8 years ago, is that for any manager, or any leader for that standpoint, is to think about the people who are under you as your direct supports instead of your direct reports. Because you as a manager, your role is to create the conditions that help your people be as successful as they can be. And so when you think about it as being a direct support, then it completely flips how you go about doing that. So how do you take that to the brew pub level and the different the production side versus the tap house front of house side? One of the things that I started doing was to recognize that I had two sets of customers. Definitely had the external customers. Those are the people that are sitting at the bar drinking the beer. Those are the people that are coming in for the brewery tours. I also had internal customers. And those internal customers were the people who were responsible for serving and selling and ensuring that the guest had a great experience with the beer. And that was the front of the house. So it was incumbent upon me to provide my internal customers a great customer experience, whatever that looked like. Was it doing a 30-second, 60-second beer information at pre-shifts? Was it simply walking by and somebody's carrying a beer and they poured it and it's got a fantastic 1-inch head of foam on it, and you compliment them by saying, "Hey, nice pour, you did a great job." And so it was all those little things of treating my internal customers, they're my coworkers as well, but they're my internal customers, and helping them feel appreciated and showing and providing them the tools to be able to do a fabulous job.
No, I love all the insight you're giving, and the philosophies that you're talking about align so much with the things I believe in. It's like truly the little things that make a big difference. And I'm a little upset you and I didn't actually connect on video until recently.
Right. So one of the questions, back to that question, and I recognize that not every person wants to be involved in all of that. There's brewers who they want to focus down on the brewing side and some of the technical work, and that's great. My suggestion would be is that if you find yourself in a role where maybe you should be out in that brew pub tap room atmosphere, maybe go and find a different role where you can add more value doing the things that you really love to do, and then free somebody else up to who loves to do some of those other things as well.
And that kind of leads into, the next part of your life. One of the people that I'm closest with in the industry is Carrie Shumway of Craft Brewery Financial Training. And
Sure.
outside of spreadsheets, which Carrie is super passionate about, I think number 2 on his list, and Carrie, if you're listening, feel free to correct me, would probably be open book management. And that's something you're also passionate about. You're passionate about transparency and cultures, and especially, the workplace. Why is this something you want to spend time on right now?
So we've all been in situations wherever we've worked, where we've probably thought, if I was the owner of the company, God, I wouldn't be doing that. I would do this instead. Or we've all been in situations where we've felt powerless, even though we've pretty sure we got a good idea in how to improve things. And I talked about how I left a company in part because I didn't want to work there anymore. The culture wasn't good. And so we've probably all experienced being in really crappy organizations from a culture standpoint. I've also been a part of organizations that have had some fantastic culture. And so it's been it's really been in my head for the last 5 or 7 years of how can you go about building that? What does it take to create that trust? And what does it take to create that engagement so that you really have that kind of a culture where employees want to be there at work? And so over my years of brewing, I've certainly done a lot of reading. You'll find me reading lots of business books. The one that really struck me was open book management. And it is in part because I've had a keen interest in financials my entire life. In fact, let's go back to high school. We talked about that earlier. In my junior year, I was my junior class treasurer. Right? So money is always, and financials have always kind of been top of mind for me. And when I was at the Austin Craft Brewers Conference, somewhere around 2005, I think, I went to a panel discussion on open book management. And it was Kim Jordan, New Belgium Brewing, Wynn Odell from Odell Brewing, and Marcy, I always forget her last name, I think she's Alaska Brewing. And they had a panel discussion on open book management. And that's where I first learned about it. And I began paying attention. And so I ended up picking up the book at some point along the way, The Great Game of Business by Jack Stack. It's the same book that Kim picked up and led her to implement open book management at New Belgium. And the more I read and the more I paid attention to it, it made a lot of sense. It was providing a way for employees to develop and get and have that ownership mindset. It was a way for employees to think like owners, because you're teaching them the concepts of how the business runs and what goes into the financial success of the company. You're giving them the tools to act like owners, because the more they know about how the business runs, the better decisions that they can make. And that transparency that you have as an organization then, leads to good decisions and acting like an owner. And finally is you give them the opportunity to feel like an owner, right? What do owners get when the business is successful? Well, they're going to get financial rewards for that. And so including a piece or a component of financial reward based upon performance that everybody knows how we get there is a huge part of rewarding that engagement and that ownership mentality.
The philosophy you're talking about right now, I mean, it sounds like a win for both the employees and the owners to get the employees to feel more empowered and more invested in the business. Why do you believe some businesses aren't open for the idea of open book management?
Some of the things that I've heard, I've actually heard owners say this. They will say, I don't want my employees to know how bad things are, which is really the exact reason why it's important that they let employees know what's going on, right? Because what are employees worried about? They want to make sure they've got a job, right? Well, how does it feel if things are so bad and you walk in one day and, whoops, the business is closing? In fact, Standing Stone Brewing closed their doors at the end of May. And I can guarantee you, well, I can't guarantee you, but based upon what I know of my experience there, that was probably a surprise to a majority of employees. They didn't know it was coming. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But if things are really bad, guess what? If you're willing to open up and share and say, guess what? Things are bad and I need your help, right? There's a vulnerability there. I don't have all the answers and I don't know how to fix it all. Would you please help me? Guess what? People are going to step up to the plate. Now, and you start showing them what's wrong and what's bad. People are going to come together to make it better. And I got this comment from a client just the other day, and it was this particular client usually has a fabulous first quarter. It's probably one of their biggest quarters of the year. They're in the beer business. Just the structure of some of the beers that they sell, first quarter is huge for them, which leads to second quarter really being in the doldrums, right? They lose money on their P&L generally. And this is the first year that they've been practicing open book management, playing the great game. And they're right at the tail end of the second quarter. And sure enough, the business cycle is what they've always experienced. And his comment was that I no longer have to bear the fear of how terrible we do in the second quarter. So all of these previous years, he's been carrying that load on his shoulders alone. Now there's probably a few other people who know in upper management. Now, though, everybody in the organization knows that this is our challenge. This is where we struggle. And we're now all in this together to do what we can to make it better because we know this is the issue. And so it's this huge relief off of him in that he used to have to bear that fear alone. He doesn't have to anymore. He's now got the support of his entire team, right? So that's the ironic part of people saying, well, I don't want people to understand how bad things are.
I love that, Larry. It relates to a book I literally just finished. I just finished reading the book When Fish Fly by John Yokoyama. And he was one of the owners of the Pike Place Fish Market, the world famous Pike Place Fish Market. And the book's about creating a company culture that almost envisions everything you're talking about today. He doesn't use the term open book management. That's what he's referring to in most of the book. And he talks about how the holiday season, they have a super busy season at the fish market. And historically, Januaries are just terrible. And he used to feel that all by himself. But when he let his staff know that, look, here's what's going on. We have our high season, then we have our low season. The staff tries to think of ways they can make the most of it. And when you get your employees thinking like an owner in ways they can see success for everyone, it makes them feel empowered, and it takes that weight off the owner's shoulders in a way, like you mentioned.
Sure. You asked, Andrew, why are some reasons that people don't embrace open book management? Another very common reason is that people are afraid to share the numbers from a transparency standpoint, because they'll say, well, what if my employees go and share that information with other competitors? And okay, well, what if? Well, what's going to happen? In the end, nothing's going to happen. So what? Your competitors now know some of your numbers, but your competitors do things differently. Your competitors have a different culture, especially if you're in an open book culture where everybody in the organization sees how their individual role has a direct line of sight to the financial success of the company. Does your competitor have that? Well, if they're not an open book management company, they don't. Right? So their owner over there is bearing that fear still, right? That maybe their employees are less engaged. So what if your competitor sees your numbers? What are they going to do with it? Are they going to walk into your business and put you out of business? No. So it's a displaced fear that really shouldn't be a fear. But that's definitely another reason that people will give.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that one. Now, Larry, I mean, you're obviously certified in the great game of business. You alluded to that you're working with breweries now with open book management. Like, when you wake up in the morning, what are your goals and what motivates you to continue working with breweries like this? And what do you hope to see out of these relationships?
I hope to see changed lives, because it is, one of the things that happens when a company first goes open book is employees tend to think that the owners are just raking it in, right? That they're taking it home to the bank. As any owner will tell you, that's not the case. And in fact, it's a struggle. And so when you have those aha moments by people to say, oh, I didn't realize we're only making 3 cents of every dollar that we sell. And from that 3 cents, we got to spend that on buying new equipment. We got to pay some interest and more debt back. Oh, okay. Those aha moments are great, because all of a sudden people get that this isn't a cash cow. And when somebody asks them, well, would you help me improve that? People's eyes light up, right? They all of a sudden they feel seen and heard, because the ideas that they've had on how to improve are now being welcomed. And when they're welcomed and they're successful, then they get to share in that success. So those are some of the things that drive me. Part of it too is like that. I was just telling you the owner who told me the other day about not having to bear that burden anymore. And that changed his life, right? So that's pretty darn cool when you can work with an organization and you can affect change that makes a huge difference.
It almost reminds me of when you were talking about you finished your 8.5-hour brew day, then you have to go lead like an educational session with the taproom staff that you dreaded. Not saying you're dreading at all your interactions with the brewers these days, but you left it so energized. I mean, you were just so happy to see the impact you made on someone for the better and to see their positive change.
Oh, totally. Yeah. One of the things that you don't know this, one of the things that I get a kick out of, and it's part of it, is that I love to share information. I love to share knowledge. And so when I can share knowledge that can help somebody else and they take it and they use it and it does help them, that's awesome.
That's
right?
the best.
That's one thing that probably drives me.
Wow, I absolutely love that, Larry. I couldn't agree with you more in that philosophy of life. Now I want to completely mix it up as we wind down, because as we mentioned earlier, you're in Missoula, Montana. You were in Oregon, a few years ago. How did you end up in Missoula, Montana?
Oh, yeah, we were in Oregon 11 years, longer than we anticipated. And my wife absolutely loves snow. She would live in snow year round, I think, if she could. So, which may beg the question, why did we move to Missoula? But we didn't get enough snow in Southern Oregon. You could see the snow in the wintertime up in the mountains, 8,000, 7,000, 8,000 feet. Rarely, if ever, got snow in the valley. And when you did, it melted by 11 or noon that same day. So we knew that we wanted to live in snow. I grew up in Wyoming. As you heard earlier, I cross country skied, raced in high school. So I'm good with snow too. So we decided, we sold our house last July and we hit the road. We'd already done a lot of research into the different communities that were of interest. And there were some things that a community had to have, so that either kept them in the pile or it, tossed them out.
So you were essentially interviewing these communities, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then we left, I think, Southern Oregon sometime in early August of 2021 last year. And we traveled for the next 2 or 3 months, and we would go visit a lot of the places that we had on our list. And we would stay there for a week or so and get to know the community and look at the community through the eyes of what's it like to be a resident, as opposed to simply, hey, we're here to visit and vacation for a week. And it was through that process that Missoula really hit on a lot of the things that were important to us. Snow being one of them, mountains, that was another one. Water, there's 2 rivers that come through town, so that's important. They've got a fabulous food system, great library. They've got a really good sized regional airport, which my wife flies a lot for her work. I will definitely do some flying with mine. So a decent airport nearby. And yeah, we fell in love with Missoula. Oh, and when the week we were here, people were so friendly. Everywhere you went, people would say hi, they would talk, they would be willing to share information. And so that was a good calling card too. And I've still found it to be that way in the 5 months we've been here.
No, did you have an actual checklist you were having boxes checked marked box with, or did you kind of just have it all in your mind?
We had originally set up a spreadsheet, right? But that was partly to just keep track of things, because at the time, I think at one time we probably had 20 or 25 different communities that we were exploring. That we eventually whittled down to maybe 4 or 5 that we actually went and visited. So.
That sounds like an amazing opportunity. I live in Norfolk, Virginia, and I love visiting small towns more than anything. But to take the jump and to go, on a trip to visit all the small towns you would consider living in other places, not necessarily small towns, sounds like an amazing opportunity. And I'm a little bit jealous of you and hope to do that someday.
Yeah, well, it's how we landed in Oregon, but that's a story for another day.
That's a story for another conversation. So
that was a trip around the country too.
Oh, amazing. So we'll end with this question then. Of all the places you've visited, where would you like to go back to most?
Oh my gosh. Where would I like to go back to?
And to give you a little time to think, when I travel, I don't typically repeat places. I'll go to a place one time, have a great time, then want to explore a new city next time. One of the places that I have been twice, actually, I've been to New Glarus, Wisconsin twice. It was the first time, which is such a unique experience. I drove through again, and that's not something I normally do. And it's tough to go back somewhere and want to re-experience something versus experience something new. And I think for curious people like ourselves, you want to try that new thing often.
Yeah, I'd probably put in there Jackson, Wyoming, but that's just because I grew up in Wyoming. I raced cross country up in Jackson, and we love the area. So we've been back numerous times, and probably still will be, of places that we have visited. Yeah.
Well, Jackson, Wyoming is a beautiful place, and I've been once. I don't know if it'd be the first place I go back to, but I definitely had a fantastic time hiking out that way.
Yes. Yeah. That's another great thing about Missoula. I can take my dogs and be on a trailhead within 5 minutes of where we live and off into the woods in the mountains.
Oh my
Love
gosh,
it.
how many dogs you have, Larry?
We got two. The one that you saw right back there, and then our youngest. We did not have her at that point in 2020. No, yeah, 2019 is when that photo was, and it doesn't matter. So.
Well, Larry, I really appreciate the conversation and all your insight and philosophies on life and business today. It's been highly, enjoyable to learn from you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
The only thing I'd like to add is this has been fabulous, it's been a fun conversation. And when somebody, and I say when because it's only when people are ready to add something to their lives or add something to their business or make a change, then explore it and explore what open book management might look like and could do for your company. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Larry. And I really hope we get to actually meet in person before too long.
And I'm sure we will.
I'm sure of it, Larry. Well, cheers. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Oh, bye. My pleasure, Andrew. Cheers.